Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Follow Lead Podcast, a Christian Leaders Podcast powered by Greg Fay Insurance. If you haven't talked to my man, Greg Fay, do so today. Go to gregfayinsurance.com. Today on the podcast, one of my best friends, a dear leader in the disciple-making movement, Justin Gravitt. Justin Gravitt's got a brand new book out called The Foundation of a Disciple-Making Culture. And I think this is important for every leader because if we're not building a good culture, we will be in deep trouble. If we're not building a good culture, we'll be in deep trouble. So in this dialogue today, we talk about what it means to build a disciple-making culture. We talk about what it means to live out the Great Commission. Such a great dialogue with such a dear friend. I hope you do enjoy it. So now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Justin Gravitt. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have one of my dear friends with me, Justin Gravitt. You guys know Justin. We do the Practitioners podcast together. He was on an earlier episode and just recently, episode 351 with David Holmes, as we talked about changing culture. Justin, thank you so much for agreeing to be back on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. It's been a bit since I've been like a guest without somebody, or not cross doing the thing.
Yeah. How long have you and I meet every other week? How many years do you think that's been?
Oh, this feels like a wife question. Let's see.
I don't care what you say. I'm trying to remember myself.
I think it's been, close to 10 years, give or take.
Yeah. Part of the reason right? I think it's 10. I had us at 10 in my head, but I have a tendency to round up. If you'll just ask my wife, she'll tell you. Yeah. When you and I first met each other, I was the lead pastor of a church and you were still working for NCM, but you were brand new into this NCM role, about walking alongside local churches as a coach and a partner. I'm curious, as you think back to those 10 years about helping leaders lead well, what have you learned about walking alongside these kind of leaders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things that stand out, right? So again, for context, I'm mostly walking alongside lead pastors and other church staff. There's some that are just everyday church leaders too that work in the corporate world or whatever. But with pastors specifically, I found that there's two areas that they're kind of always trying to get on top of. So the first area is their schedule, right? So they have a lot happening. And in the Christian world, we talk about a Sabbath, right? And so trying to clear out space one day a week where you can just rest. And most pastors really struggle there. The other area that pastors typically struggle or typically are trying to get on top of is just maintaining non-Christian friendships and clearing space and time for them as well. So those are a couple of areas that I didn't know going in, that those would be kind of the challenge points for a lot of pastors. But the other thing I have developed is an extreme compassion for the life of a pastor. They have a lot on them. They have a lot of people coming to them and looking at them for the answer, or wanting them to be present or to be involved in a conversation or a situation. And it's really hard. It's really hard for pastors to balance everything that's on them. So those are a few things that immediately come to mind.
Now, over the last couple of years, while you're still doing all of the NCM work locally, you've also kind of taken on some national leadership for Navigators Church Ministries, which is if you're unfamiliar with NCM is what we'll call it. If you're unfamiliar with NCM, they're an organization that walks alongside local churches to help build a disciple-making culture. And I've been so impressed with the work that NCM does. Can you kind of tell everybody what your role is with NCM these days?
Yeah, so currently I'm the Director of Innovation and Momentum for NCM. So that role is part of our lead team. So as a national work, we have 4 of us that kind of set direction and do the bulk of leadership And so I'm one of those four with that title. So that's a lot of, I mean, that doesn't say a lot, I realize, but some of the, let me flesh it out. Some of what I do practically is helping NCM with direction, helping NCM with looking at what is currently working across the country in churches and the things that we're trying to accomplish, but also trying to develop some new initiatives and some new things that either are worth trying or we've tried them a little bit and now we need to put some more fuel into them so that they can expand because we think it is working well.
Like many organizations throughout the U.S., you guys are suffering from a real recruiting crisis, right? Like I know that's one of the big pushes this year. And
yep.
How are you guys tackling that beast in terms of recruiting, and what have you seen in terms of what's drawing people into organizations these days that may be different than ever before?
Yeah, I think what I've seen is I've talked with others about our recruiting challenges is that it is kind of pervasive, right? As the boomers look to retirement and start retiring, and then, in the nonprofit world, in the Christian space, there's not as many leaders coming up behind them, and I kind of think that's true all across the board. So some of the stuff that we're doing is we're just trying to be out there more. We're putting our line in the water, so to speak, and talking more about what it could look like for people to come and serve with us and to push the mission that God has given us of, coming alongside pastors, helping them develop disciple-making cultures that will transform their communities. So we're out there talking about a lot more. And one of the things we're learning is that it's relational, that we can put up, an ad here or put something in a message board or be online in different ways. But without those personal connections, they don't often lead to much fruit. And so we're just trying to be out talking and engaging and trying to serve people, but also let them know, like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what God's called us to. And maybe God would be calling you to join us in some sort of way. And if he is, let's have a conversation. But if not, that's okay too, right? So it is those more intentional steps that aren't anything huge, but we realized that as an organization, we were so focused on the work that we hadn't been focused on trying to invite others into the work with us as staff or as, really invested volunteers.
It's always interesting to me when I hear you talk about relational tactics, because I know it's not naturally how you're bent. You and I have talked about this before, and if you've ever listened to any of Justin and I's podcasts, you know that he's the more intentional one in our relationship, and I tend to be the more relational one. How do you lean into that retentional side for the purposes of accomplishing the mission? What's that? I know that there's a leader who's listening right now who is like, I just hate all the peopling. How do you get over that hump of like, I got to go people today?
Yeah. Well, I people pretty much every day, and it is more and more comfortable the more I do it. But one of the things that I've learned is that I have to pull back from it too, right? So I have to create space in my day that's really intentional to recharge. And for me, recharging happens alone or with people I'm closest with in the world. And so, I think that more than anything over the past 10 years is something that I've grown in, is how do I take that time where it's discretionary time, right? I'm not aiming it at work. I'm not aiming it at time with my family and time with my kids, but it's me time, right? And so whereas 10 years ago, I would turn on a ball game, watch a whole game, or I would, scroll or do whatever the thing is, like I've learned that those things don't provide energy back. And so it's an energy neutral investment. And so one of the things that I've done a lot better in over the past couple of years is, all right, what are those things that really fill me up and bring energy back to me? And so instead of watching a whole game, I'll watch part of the game and then go do some of those other things. And so I still have energy neutral things. I'm not saying those are bad, but having some of those, it's really having self-discipline, right? To pull back from some of those energy neutrals to get into some of those spaces that really bring life back to me.
One of the things I know about your life is that you're doing a lot of things that run in parallel like roads or streams, right? So you've got your work with national NCM, you've got your work with local churches, you've got your work that you do in the community for your non-Christian streams, you're finding your friends who are non-Christians, and then you've got your disciple making that you actually do. And then that kind of the next one is the writing part, which feeds all of it, but is really different than all of it. How do you break up your calendar to stay disciplined on hitting all of those tasks? Or, I'm just thinking about the leader who's listening right now, who's like, oh my gosh, this guy does everything and I can't seem to do anything. What's the first step in getting a little bit more self-discipline?
Yeah. Like you said, I'm really intentional, right? So the way I'm able to do a lot of different pieces and is I'm just intentional about blocking out time. I'm pretty good at saying no to things that come in the door. I heard a leader say once, and I wish I remember where it was from, but he said there's success brings opportunities, and the key is discerning whether they're opportunities or distractions. And so I think that is so true that, when we do things well as leaders, there's more things that come in the door. And we have to be super discerning on what are the things that I need to be saying yes to and what are the things I need to be saying no to. I have priorities in my life. My relationship with God is first and foremost. Engaging with my family and stewarding well my role as a husband and a father. Honestly, after that, it's making disciples, but even that has priorities in it for me. So my non-Christian friendships are a higher priority than my Christian friends. So if a non-Christian friend calls and, hey, I need help, can you come over? Can you do this? Like, I will push away and push aside some, even if I had a meeting with you, for instance, I'd be like, hey, can we reschedule that? Because I want that to be a higher priority. I think it needs to be. My writing is something I've done most of my life, and for a lot of my life, it was just for me. But that's one of those spaces, as we talked earlier, like that fills me up in a lot of ways, like just sitting and processing and thinking, and then I can't really know what I think very well or clearly if I'm not putting it on paper somehow. So that's part of how that fits into my life. Now, the nice part is that a lot of times I'm thinking about things that have relevance to the work and ministry that I'm called to. And so I'm able to kind of do that thing both for me, and later on it comes out to, what I hope is for the benefit of others as well.
One of the things I know about you is that you have a very high standard of excellence, right? And when it comes to the work that you put out, you want it to be top notch. You want it to be perfect. I imagine that there's somebody who's listening right now who's like, I just can't be a writer because I'm so bad at it. How do you wrestle with shipping work when it's like, it's not perfect?
Yeah. Yeah, I gave up the perfect notion in my writing quite a while ago. I've learned that writing is one of those things that the more we do it, the better we get. And whenever we go back to something we've written, 6 months ago, a year ago, if we've gotten better, we see things there that are like, ooh, I'd say a little bit differently now, or, I wish this had been communicated in a different way. But, I think shipping it is important because with that rhythm, and for years now, this is probably six to 8 years ago somewhere, I started blogging. I think at your suggestion, Tony, so I appreciate that. But what I decided was I was going to put something out into the world every 2 weeks. And for years, I did that. And it helped me grow as a writer. But sometimes people say, well, I don't have anything to say. I don't know what to write. And what I learned from that is that when I started, I was writing because I had something to say. But later on, it flipped. And I had things to say because I was writing. And so just being a writer and having that rhythm helped me to notice things in the world that I was like, ooh, I want to mention that somewhere. Ooh, that links to this. And so it created a lot more insights and things that I could move out into the world. Just that habit of writing and habit of shipping it. And so that's something that I've learned along the way that I think is really valuable.
One of the things I appreciate about your writing is that it continues to evolve. You've written an ebook, and you've also written the bicycle illustration, which kind of is an expanded pamphlet. It's not a full book, but it's a tool really to talk about disciple making. Strongly recommend it. And then now you've got a paperback hard book that you can buy on Amazon, The Foundation of Disciple Making Culture, Building a Core Team to Awaken a Movement. Talk to me about the evolution of your writing and how you knew that God was calling you to the next version of it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting story. So I've been involved with discipleship.org for a number of years, part of just the partner team with that. And it was in 2019 or 2020, I forget. Bobby Harrington, the leader of it, asked me if I would write an ebook for them. And I was like, yeah, sure. I was excited for the opportunity. And so I started to write it. And, 2 weeks into starting to write it, where I was still ideating a lot of things, tornado came through Dayton, hit our house pretty well. And so then I was dealing with all that, and then the deadline was coming, and I don't like to miss deadlines. And so I'm like, I just got to get this thing done. And so I was writing, sent it to him. Again, you got to ship it, right? So shipped it, felt okay about it, not great. And he graciously came back a few weeks later and was like, hey, this probably needs a lot of rework done to it. But something happened in between shipping it to him and, again, just thinking, I was like, man, if I had it to do over again, I would do something totally different. And as we talked and he wanted me to revise what I'd sent him, I was like, I really don't have any interest in revising that. I said, but if you're open, I would love to write something on the foundation of building a disciple-making culture. And he was like, that sounds great. And so I worked on that from that time until it was finished, and then sent it to him. And that became one of the more popular books that discipleship.org put out as far as ebooks. And then that turned into this book that's coming out, this month here. So it was an evolution both in thinking, but also I've heard that in writing, a lot of times your first couple paragraphs is kind of the equivalent of clearing your throat. And when you go back to revising, you realize, I don't really need those first couple paragraphs. I'm really saying what I want down here. And I think that first ebook was kind of that for me of all right, I just got to clear that stuff aside to get to what became that first ebook of the Foundation of Disciple Making Culture. That was really ebook in size, but also scope. And so what's happened now with Tyndale is really an expansion of that and a much more fully orbed picture of what it looks like to build that sort of foundation.
Along the way, you kind of have become a culture expert, and I've, again, been very fortunate to kind of have a front row seat to all of this. When you think about changing culture, and that's ultimately what this book is really about, is about changing the culture of a movement of people. What's the first step for the leader who's listening that's like, man, I want to change my culture too. What do I have to do first?
Yeah, you're right. Because the book is about, disciple-making culture specifically, but the target is pastors and church leaders who have a culture now that they want to evolve into or to change into a disciple-making culture. So the way to get to a disciple-making culture is not we just flip this switch and all of a sudden it's there. There's a process. And the process that I write about is a process that will work in a church, it'll work in a nonprofit, it'll work in a business. And one of the things that I do in the book is compare what Jesus did and how he did it, forming a culture of people that eventually went and changed the world, quite literally changed the world. How did he do that? And as I was looking into that, I realized that what Jesus did also parallels what, leadership expert John Cotter talks about when he's talking about culture change. So how do we change culture? For a leader, one of the things that I really believe and have learned as I've walked alongside church leaders and helping them through the process is that if you want to change culture, it starts with you. right? And a principle that I've seen over and over is what's inside is going to come out. So what's inside of you as a leader is going to come out as you lead. What's inside of the top level of leadership and the culture that you have there and your top level of leadership is going to come out and filter through the organization. And so if you want to change culture, most of the time it starts with changing yourself, or at the very least, changing or looking at that top level. What's the culture you have at the top level of leadership? And how does that need to be shaped in order to have the culture that you desire? So that is, again, there's more to it, right? But and the starting point, it starts with you. And whether that you as an individual or you as your top level leaders in your organization, if you don't have the culture that you desire throughout the organization at that top level, you can't expect to deliver anything different to those who are under you, that you're leading. So,
hey guys, just pausing this conversation with Justin to remind you to check out some of our incredible partners. You know how I feel about my man Trent over at the Barga team. If you're looking for your next home, vacation home, forever home, whatever home you need, talk to Trent today. Speaking of homes, My 5-Star Home Services is where you need to go for HVAC, plumbing, and electrical needs. Winter's coming, so service your unit today. Go to my5starhomeservices.com and be sure to tell them that Tony sent you. Their profit on purpose mentality gives back to the local community and is such a gift to so many. Again, go to my5starhomeservices.com. Let's finish up this conversation with Justin.
One of the things that happens in my life is that I have a hard time giving an honest evaluation of how I'm doing at building culture, right? And so I think that the culture is one way, and sometimes my team thinks it's another way. How do leaders get a clear picture of what the culture really is?
Yeah. So one of the things that we use are some diagnostic surveys, essentially organizational surveys. There's a Reveal survey for the church that's been out since really the early 2000s. And what it does is it compares the answers that the people in that organization communicate, and then it compares them to the survey sample that kind of collects all the data that's been gathered over those years. So, 10,000 plus churches that have taken it, which helps position a church, right? Because if you're just taking it on your own, you don't really know, okay, we, baptized 20 people and we're a church of 200. Is that good or not good? Like, if we don't have comparison, we don't know where we're at with the averages. So I think that's part of it. The other tool that's really helpful, and I might sound self-serving here, is to bring somebody else in, right? That's not already enmeshed in the culture. When my wife and I were missionaries in Southeast Asia, one of the things that was really amazing to me is how much I saw in the new culture I was in. So I would go there, and not only did I notice things, I'm like, that's different, that's interesting, that's whatever. But it happened just as much when we came back 10 plus years ago. Is we came back to American culture, which I grew up in, obviously, and I'm an American, but I was noticing so much because I was out of the fishbowl for a while, right? And so if you're only swimming in that water of your own culture, you're going to miss things. But if you can get out or bring someone in that's not used to it, they can help you see. And actually, that's one of the biggest barriers to developing a new culture or that culture that you're trying to get to, is you're not able to see very well. You're not able to see what is. You're not able to see very clearly what you want it to become. And a lot of that is because, you're the proverbial fish in the fishbowl that doesn't even recognize the water. And so either you getting out and coming back in or inviting someone in from the outside is really, really helpful to, accurately see what is true in that culture.
One of the things I appreciate about this writing is the emphasis on team, and you use the acronym CORE as a part of that. CORE is common vision, own the vision individually, relationally resilient as a result of their connection to one another and the mission, and have endurance to weather discouragement, weariness, and hardship, right, in order to achieve the objective. As someone who leads regularly, it feels harder to bring the team along. And so talk to the leader who's like, I got to build a team to change culture. Why is the juice worth the squeeze on that?
Yeah. Yeah, it is essential. And it's essential because without a team to help carry that load with you, a lot of times the leader is isolated and on his own. But the other part goes back to what I was saying. Like if at the top level of your leadership, of your organization, there's not a team and you're not relating in ways that show care and concern for one another, care and concern for the mission, clarity of what the mission is and who this company or this organization is seeking to become, then what happens is those people go out into their spaces within the organization and they're saying things that aren't in agreement and they're behaving in ways that aren't in agreement. But if we want people to become something, we need to give them an example that is clear. Now, what happens in church world is, we're really, really good at being in groups together. We show up for our own agenda. We're motivated by that. But the difference is in teams, we show up for a shared agenda, a shared mission. And so it's very different showing up as a group member than it is showing up as a teammate. And there's different things that we do to kind of draw that out. But if you want to be a team, right, there's interdependence. There's an agreed upon and shared goal. There's agreed upon roles and how we're going to get to that goal. There's clarity on what needs to happen in order to reach those goals. But in groups, a lot of times, most of those things are lacking, or we're weaving in and out of them so that when we leave the room, we're not carrying it outside the room to the rest of the organization. But again, what's inside, what's true of that culture at the top is going to filter down. And so if there's interdependence, if there's care, concern, those four things that I talk about in the book, core, common vision. Do we carry those things together? Do we see it? But not only do we see it, are we agreed enough on it that we're willing to move and make changes to make that a reality? And that's kind of owned individually, right? Am I willing? Yeah, you might want that, boss, but I don't know that I want that much. And so, I'll nod my head here in the meeting. But when I leave, I'm not really going to talk about it or see things that I maybe need to see in order to help move that forward. But relational resilience is a piece of it too, because if we're really going to care for one another and love one another, then we have to have honesty. We have to be clear about where we're at. We have to be clear about, if one of the people on the team isn't carrying their weight, or if they're doing things that are counterproductive to the shared goal that we have. We can't just leave that. We can't just ignore it. And often in our culture, we do exactly that because we're conflict averse. Or instead of ignoring it, we have people that are conflict loving and go in there and bomb things all up. And then, we can't even exist in the same spaces together. But the final piece is that enduring to the end, because what happens inevitably when we're trying to bring new culture or change into an organization is people want to go back to the way it was before. Change is hard. Is it worth the squeeze? I'm squeezing, doing something different. Well, okay, but we can do it for a little while, and then people get tired and they want to go back. They don't want to do it anymore. And so how do we move through that barrier of, wanting to go back to the way things were and getting to the space where, no, this is our new reality. This is now who we are and a part of how we're going to do things around here moving forwards.
I love that. I really love the distinction between a group member and a teammate. In the church world and in the business world, it's hard to get people to buy into that. And so from your experience, when is it time to fire someone or kick them off the team? What's that look like?
Yep. So again, I work with churches and nonprofits. So
we're the worst at it. We're the worst.
Yeah, all the top people are like volunteers, right? And so it's like, well, how do you fire a volunteer? Well,
carefully.
Sometimes you need to, but there are church staff too that need to be reassigned to another role, another place sometimes. If we're doing all those things, right? If we're caring well, if we've casted the vision clearly, the team is on board, and maybe somebody's not who's on the team and you need them on board. Like, we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that. And that's where that owned individually comes in. So if we're going to get to that place where we're recognizing that somebody is not coming along, it's a question of, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to plow around them and just try to keep moving and hope they'll come along, or hope they won't disrupt things as we go along? I don't recommend that. What I recommend is individual conversations that try to get at the root of what the problem is, or what it is about that person's value system, that person's, wiring, or their own view of where things should go that differs from the vision that's being put forward. Sometimes that communication kind of solves the problem, because what's happening is not there's an actual conflict, there's a miscommunication somewhere. You're saying something really clearly, but they're hearing it differently based on who they are, based on the experiences that they've had in the past. And so a lot of times that sort of communication does remove the obstacle. Other times it doesn't. Other times it's like, well, you value this and I value that, and I don't think I'm ever going to get there. And so then there's a conversation that needs to happen of like, well, okay, so if that's where we're at, what does this mean? Is this team something you want to continue on? Do you think it would be best for the team for you to continue? And most of the time it's clear to both sides, and there's agreement of, yeah, it's probably time for me to step away. Now it's, with the volunteers, it's a little easier to step away on one sense, right, at that level, because their livelihood's not attached to it. But it gets harder if, like, that's a staff member, and that means those individual conversations are harder too, because to get to that level of honesty that we need to get to, they might not want to get there, because they could see, well, if I'm really honest here, they're probably not going to want me to work here anymore.
Right.
And I don't have a lot of experience with all that. So there's probably another guy you can have on the podcast that has better answers on that side of it. But I do know that you have to get to that level of honesty if you want a team that's going to function well together. And doing that, even if they're hard conversations, is essential to develop those new cultures that you're trying to develop.
One of the things that I know that you have a lot of experience with is bringing your faith into the workplace, right? And you did that in prior to moving back to Dayton. You've coached numerous people on that. I'm curious, for the executive or the entrepreneur who's listening now, who's like, well, I don't really have a faith-based organization, but I'm trying to live out my faith. What are some of your go-to tools or nuances to bring to the table on how to open some of those faith-based conversations so that maybe they can find someone to disciple in the workplace?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, and, when we were overseas, I was teaching in a government school. My identity there was not at all tied to the navigators or being a missionary. People didn't know that was a part of our life, but they did know from the start that Jesus was, and that following him was the most important thing to me. And so one of the things that I had been taught prior to that by someone that had invested in me is that, the greatest thing I can do is carry Jesus with me. Right. And so my identity isn't just, hey, I need to be away to recharge, or, I have a high sense of, quality and want to put that out into the world. Like, those are all fine things, but I also need to be talking about Jesus and the importance that he makes in my life and my decision making. And so doing that in the context that I was in a school, it was interspersing things. It was, at lunches with my fellow teachers, and they're talking about things that they did or had read. I'm talking about, the time that I had with God in the Word. Now, they didn't have anything like that, right? This was a non-Christian culture. It was a Buddhist-dominated culture. And so for somebody to sit and talk about the Bible was really weird for them. But I did it in a way that was, I'm just talking about me. I'm not talking about you. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm talking about my life and what's important to me and how it makes a difference for me. For a bit, it took me, when I first learned that, it felt unnatural. But the more that I did it, the more natural it felt. And one person asked me one time, he said, "Hey, could you just not talk about that with me? Like, it makes me uncomfortable and I don't really like to hear about it, et cetera, et cetera." And this was someone that I had a friendship with. And I said, "Well, no, I'm not going to do that." And he was surprised. And I said, "Let me tell you why." I said, "If we're going to be friends, then I need to be able to share with you the things that are important to me, whether it's important to you or not, or whether you're really that interested or not." I said, in every friendship I'm in, there's times that some people they're saying things to me that I'm like, I don't care about that at all. I'm ready to move on to the next part of the conversation. But part of being a friend is listening and caring enough to hear what's important to that other person. And I said, that's what I do for other people. And if somebody's going to be in a friendship with me, that's something that they need to be willing to do for me as well. Now, I said too, I'm like, well, I don't expect you to do anything with what I'm telling you with that. I'm just asked that you allow some space where I can share some things that are on my heart and things that are important to me too. It was a hard conversation. It was a conversation that led to, he's like, I don't know how I feel about it. I was like, okay. So, but later on he came back and he was like, I think you're right. And we were able to do that moving forward. And so that's kind of a principle that I live in my life is, this is who I am. I'm not going to hide who I am. I'm not going to try and say things to you to try to get you to be like me necessarily. But I need you to know that this is who I am as part of it. And when you are around me, it's part of the Justin experience, right? So
I love it. That's such a good way to think about it. And hey, this is just, I'm bringing Jesus with me and this is how we're doing it. And you can either get on board or not. And that's okay either way, right? Like it's hard, but it's okay.
Right. Yep.
Okay, I have one more question to ask you, but before I do, I know that the podcast family is going to want to connect with you all over the interwebs. Where is the best place to pick up their copy of the book and also to learn more and maybe subscribe to your blog, or how do they stay in touch with all the things that God is doing in and through your ministry?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to get the book would be on Amazon. So the book is The Foundation of a Disciple-Making Culture. The best place to get in touch with me is probably through my website, justingravitt.com, 2 T's at the end. If you go there, I'd love to offer you the ebook that I wrote. It's the bicycle illustration. It's free digitally, and so if you're interested in that, it looks at how do we help somebody that says I could never make a disciple. What does that look like? How do we move them from that reality to actually starting making disciples? So love to have you check those things out. You can contact me through my website. I am present on most of the socials, not as active as most people. So probably the website would be the best spot.
All right, Justin, last question for you. You know this already because you've listened to the podcast before. It's an advice question. I ask you to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, except I get to name the season of life that you're in. And so I'm curious, if you were to go back to your very first day back in your hometown, Dayton, Ohio, Beaver Creek specifically, and you just moved back here from being a missionary in Thailand. You just finished unloading. Everything's unpacked. You probably remember the day. Everything. You're getting ready to start this brand new journey as an NCM local church guy. If you were to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice about the journey you were about to go on, what would you tell yourself?
Yeah, I would tell myself to trust God. That day and those months, honestly, were really hard because, we were back in the U.S. and I didn't want to be back here. I was starting in this role that I didn't want to be starting in. I wanted to be where we were. I wanted to be ministering overseas and with the friends that I'd made and the momentum that we had built over there. But it was real clear that that's not what Jesus was calling me to. And that distance between what I wanted and what was clear to me that Jesus was asking me to do was really hard for me to carry for a while. And if I'm honest, like, I still have those days. I still have those weeks where I'm like, as much good is happening and as much as I see what God is doing in and through me, if it was just solely my choice, I'd probably go back.
Wow.
And so, I would say to myself then, trust God, because in doing that, and I need that reminder, not just then, but still, I have to acknowledge that his way is better than mine and his plans are better than mine, because I am ultimately aimed at trying to accomplish his purposes in the world, not necessarily my own purposes in the world. So, yeah, that would be trust God. Trust God.
Amen. Amen. Well, Justin, I'm, incredibly thankful for our friendship and the way that we've been able to walk with each other the last 10 years, and I can't wait to see what God does next. So thank you for being such a good friend to me and for continuing to push the mission forward on disciple making.
Likewise. I love you, love our friendship. Thanks for having me on again. It's been a minute, right? I was one of the earlier episodes before, so
yeah,
it's
that's
fun
right. That's right.
to be back.
So, all right, well, we'll do it again soon. You just keep writing and keep putting out great content, and there'll be lots of things to talk about.
Amen.
What a great conversation with Justin. I love the idea about leaning in to culture. I love what it means to live out the Great Commission. I think Justin's book is so important for not only church leaders, but business leaders as well. How we build shared ownership, right? Corporate discovery and excitement for making disciples who make disciples. Such good stuff. Follow Justin. Go to justingravitt.com. There's links in the show notes. Let him know that you heard him here on the podcast. It always goes a long way to help spread the word about what God is doing on this platform. As always, forever thankful for you. This community is what it's all about for me, and I know that it's a big deal to give up some of your time to listen to these conversations. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, if you need anything from me, I'm embarrassingly easy to find at TWMilt, at TWMILT on Instagram, or follow the number 2leadcoaching.com. That's it for me today, guys. And remember, if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to move.